Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to Musical Talk. Sitting across from a face I haven't spoken to for a long time, Robert Gordon. Hello, Robert. How are you?
Hello, Nick. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. We are going to talk about a show that I saw recently, a small production at a small theatre called The Wizard of Oz, playing at the London Palladium. Now, you are a massive fan of the original film, aren't you, Robert, and Judy Garland herself?
Yes, of course. Well, I think everybody's a fan of the original film. Yes, so, Nick, I'm going to ask you a few questions because I haven't seen it yet. And it seems to me that obviously this is the second time Lloyd Webber has done it at the Palladium, or
well, it's his version of The Wizard of Oz, which I guess is kind of like, because years ago there was the RSC version that did the rounds, wasn't it? And then 10 years ago,
I must say I hated the RSC version, but let's just
you
put
hated
that
it,
aside.
Robert. I can't imagine such.
Oh, absolutely.
And then we had the Search for Dorothy TV show.
Yes, and that led to one of the Lloyd Webber
which led to the Lloyd Webber production at the London Palladium, produced by Lloyd Webber. And now Michael Harrison has stepped in, who is kind of the new person to produce Lloyd Webber shows, because for some reason Lloyd Webber's given up doing shows now. We don't know why. And he's handed it over to Michael Harrison. They've formed this new partnership, and this is one of the results.
Right, and it's got a very interesting cast. So I wonder, Nick, I mean, perhaps we should start by giving your overall impressions. Do you think it's successful? Has it changed much from Lloyd Webber's first production? I don't know if you know much about that.
The songs... The lyrics haven't changed, and they're by Tim Rice, the new lyrics, and they're wonderful. There's a new song for Dorothy at the beginning, which is called Nobody Understands Me. There is a song for the Wizard called The Wonders of the Universe, which is quite a nice song. And then there is If We Only Had a Plan. Was that in the film?
Certainly not.
No, there's no Jitterbug.
Well, there was a jitterbug in the film.
Yeah.
But it was cut from the film.
It was cut from the film. And there's a song at the end, sort of like There's No Place Like Home or some nonsense like that. And then there's a song called the Red Shoes Blues, which is not a blues number, it's a waltz number. And there's a song at the end of that one called Bring Me the Witch's Broom.
Well, presumably, the Wizard's song is tailored for Gary Wilmot.
No, it was Michael Crawford originally.
Oh, so that was that in the first rewrite?
So this was exactly the same as the production, but what they have done is they've updated some of the musical choices. So, for example, in the wonderful... and of course, the original songs are far better than the Lloyd Webber ones, because they're just excellent. Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg, they're just... Every time I see that show, I'm just reminded how clever these songs are. You know, Over the Rainbow, of course, is a classic. But also, they made some musical choices where they changed some of the arrangements of some of the songs. So during the wonderful kind of Munchkin operetta, I believe they called it, when the Lollipop Guild come on, they sing a kind of 1950s jive rock and roll thing, which is quite fun. And then when the Mayor of Munchkin City comes on, he's like a head-banging Gene Simmons Kiss-esque moment, which is... I mean, this show, I think it makes every effort to take you away from everything you thought you knew about The Wizard of Oz with regards to its visual style. I mean, you have the blue dress and the red shoes, but there's no broomstick, for example. There's no bubble that the Good Witch, the East, comes down. It's all very... The direction of it and the styling of it is directed by Nikolai Foster, and it's all based around kind of old Americana. So it's as if Oz itself is a road trip.
Yes.
And they're going along dusty roads to various motels and junkyards and Vegas and New York and things like that.
In a way, they've also got to compete with Wicked.
Yeah. Well, I think Wicked stands up by itself. And I think it always has done.
Does this make any references to
Wicked?
No,
not at all. I don't think they're allowed to, the same way Wicked ironically makes no references to The Wizard of Oz quotes or anything like that. But there's a couple of visual gags which I did appreciate, especially in when they get to the Emerald City, which is a parody of Times Square. So it has all these flashing lights of various musicals that are playing in Oz, and some of which you'll appreciate, Robert. Instead of Frozen, we had Emerald, which I thought was quite fun. And they parody the posters very well. We had The Phantom of the Oz, which I thought was quite nice. We had the Osney store, which is a reference to the Disney store. But the two that really stood out to me were... we had the Hamilton-style poster, and we had Margaret Hamilton, a new musical, which I thought was very nice. And we also had the La King, which was lovely, and it had Bert Lahr's face on it. So it's kind of knowing and kind of pantomime-y.
Now, the thing that interested me, that I've heard about, is that the cast is very mixed in terms of race, I suppose. How did that work?
It's fine. It's just Dorothy and her family are African American, and they work on a farm, and that's
but most of the other cast, or most of the cast of the Tin Man, the Straw Man, the Wizard, they're played by people of colour.
Yeah, which is fine.
It worked
I think
fine,
once you get into fantastical worlds, it doesn't really make any difference what colour they are, because the witch is green. So
do you think they were making a point?
No.
No.
I think they were just... there were kind of... In the beginning montage of projection, there were bits of... I think Nikolai's trying to put a bit of a historical emphasis on it, because there was footage of people going to war, and I know the piece after the... it was made before the war, wasn't it? But then it was released just as the war... Was it released before or as the war had started?
Just before the war started, I think.
But then it became a metaphor for the war, which is a wonderful lyric. A metaphor for the war.
Yes, I think that people have read The Wizard of Oz as very much an escape from war, because storm clouds are gathering. And actually, by the time the film came out, of course, everybody knew that Chamberlain was trying to make peace with Hitler. Everybody knew that Hitler was causing a stir around Europe. So it's not as if the war was not present in people's minds as something that might well happen.
So yeah, I don't think the casting had any... I mean, it was like The Wiz and The Wizard of Oz had a baby, because it was so, as I keep saying, it was so far removed from The Wizard of Oz.
And what about the Munchkins? Because I
hear
that
they were just members of the ensemble. So... But
they're not cast as little people.
No, but because the piece isn't... Because the concept is so scattered, each part of Oz they go to is based on a different version of Americana. So the Emerald City, as I said, is Times Square. Where the lion lived was kind of a distorted Vegas, and he came out and sung and Jason Manford, who was brilliant, came out and sung his song as Elvis. So there's lots of kind of fun. They looked at it and thought, what can we do that's completely different?
Lots of pop references.
Yeah, not pop references, but more modern musical choices, and I quite appreciated that. What I don't like is shows that nowadays that just use you see this in theme parks, which is fine, but to see it at the Palladium, shows that just have a backdrop of a screen for the set and bits and pieces that come on. Back to the Future does it, and they do it for projections when they have a scrim that comes down and they project onto that. It just seems a bit lazy, but this wasn't made for the Palladium like the original production was. This was made for the Curve Leicester and moved in.
So, what did you think didn't work? Apart from, you liked the set.
I liked it. I liked the weirdness of it. I think once I got the concept, I thought, okay, this is fine, I'm going to sit back. But I think, no offence to L. Frank Baum, I just think it's a bit of a stupid story. It's like, oh, you could have gone home all the time, you had a heart, you had a brain all along, you just wasted 2 hours of my life and you put these characters in peril. Now,
but it is a morality fable, isn't it?
How?
Well, in the
You had it
sense
all
that-
along.
Yes, that you had it all along, and actually, so many works of literature are now based, or maybe always have been, based on that idea that you go out looking for things in the world, and actually, it's actually the structure of Oedipus Rex, that Oedipus thinks by running away he will escape his fate, but his fate is in him.
Yeah. Well, I guess, you know, I would have liked a bit more pizzazz to it. The melting scene was quite clever, though I saw the contraption the minute it came out and thought, okay, that's a mirrored box that she's going to get on top of and she's going to go down, and she did. But I still do it, so I applaud that. It had no flying, so there were no flying monkeys. There was no... the witch herself didn't fly.
How did they then manage to create excitement about her entrances? And
That's the question.
is that a secret that you weren't?
No, it's just there was none. She would just come on. I mean, she was in the box at one time, and her broomstick had sparks that came out of it, and there were lots of bangs, and there were CO2 blasts that went up from the top of from the front of the stage. So they're kind of attempts, but the balloon, if you remember the Palladium production, I don't know if you saw it, I think had Michael Crawford dangling from it by a rope as he went over the audience, and this had a kind of H.G. Wells-esque time machine come down and pick the wizard up. So
what about the new songs, the Lloyd Webber, Tim Rice songs?
Of course, as I said, they're nowhere as excellent as the original songs, but those original songs are stunning. I don't mind the new songs. I've said many times I'm not the biggest Andrew Lloyd Webber fan on this podcast. As I've said on this podcast, I'm not the biggest Andrew Lloyd Webber fan. But because he's got good material to base things on, for example, Nobody Understands Me, which is Dorothy's song at the beginning, Nobody Understands Me.
Kind of an I Am song.
But musically, it's Nobody Understands Me, which is the major version of da 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 da. So that's, there's some thought going on there. I would have loved the jitterbug to have been put in there because they try and make the existing songs production numbers, and they just don't quite work because they weren't written as production numbers.
Yes. But Jitterbug was written as a kind of dance number, wasn't it?
Is that when they all couldn't move, when they just couldn't stop moving? Because that was in the show.
Yes, originally.
But they didn't have the song for it, so they have that moment in this production, but there's no song and dance for it. Bring me the broomstick of the Witch of the West. That's the kind of wizard song at the end of Act 1, but because you can't see him, it's just this booming voice singing at you around the theatre. It's like some bad karaoke, but the concept is fine. The opening of Act 2, which is the Red Shoes Blues, which is not a blues number, is all right. The one I really like, though, is originally sung by Michael Crawford, now sung by Gary Wilmot, who's excellent in everything, isn't he? I mean, he's such a reliable... An all-rounder, classy performer. Called The Wonders of the Universe. Is that correct, Robert, who has the programme in front of...
Wonders of the World.
Wonders of the World, which is a charming number, more interesting lyrically, and Tim Rice, you'll agree that Tim Rice's rhymes are always worth listening to. So, question for you, Robert. In the last 15 minutes, have I interested you in seeing it?
Yes, you have, actually. I was put off going because I actually never saw the original Palladium production, but I thought, why tamper with The Wizard of Oz, which is so good? Then Wicked came out, which is completely different from The Wizard of Oz.
And now they're tampering with Wicked.
Yes.
They're putting different versions of Wicked on, which is weird.
I thought, why tamper with a classic? And then I had seen a production years ago by the Royal Shakespeare Company and hadn't
Tell me about that one.
Well, I found it was rather cheap. It's so many years ago I can barely remember it. What I do remember is it had Imelda Staunton, a very young Imelda Staunton, in it.
As Dorothy, wasn't it?
As Dorothy, but she wasn't right for Dorothy. Imelda Staunton is by no means a Dorothy, and she just had the size. She was tiny.
She was a munchkin.
Well, perhaps she could have been Chief Munchkin and done that brilliantly, actually. But so I thought, oh well, it's going to be another one of those sort of exercises in reviving a classic when there's no need for it because it exists on film. And of course, there's The Wiz, which is a great show in itself and has another take. So I wondered about that, but from what you've told me, this really interests me, and it sounds like the new songs are interesting and in some ways very good, and it sounds like the production is very exciting.
It is, and it was a packed house on it was a week ago. I saw it. It was a Monday night, packed, but it is the summer holidays, so that's what this show is in for. I think it's just the Palladium is a kind of weird slot venue now, I feel, because you can't put on a show there for the amount of money unless you're Andrew Lloyd Webber and you can afford to put your own shows on there, but that's another discussion.
Does Lloyd Webber own
He does, yes.
So that helps.
Yeah. And it's more of like, oh, what's going to be in the Palladium this month? And then you've got the pantomime coming, which is always a tradition thing now. But that always was the Palladium, wasn't it? It was always a kind of... It wasn't built for long-running shows.
It was a variety house originally. I mean, it seems to me that one of the Palladium has been the sort of graveyard, even for a show like Sister Act. The very first time Sister Act came to London, and I thought it was quite brilliant and saw it twice. But they actually closed the Upper Circle because they could never sell it. So, now Sister Act's coming back for a limited run, but in a huge theatre. So if this fills the Palladium, that's impressive, even if it's only for 3 or 4 months.
And it's a very, very reliable brand for tourists and for British theatre fans as well, with a very, very good cast. Anjali Banjo, who plays the Tin Man, I'd heard of briefly through, he's part of the dance group Diversity that won Britain's Got Talent or some ghastly show like that, and he formed this whole kind of routine for the Tin Man, almost like, do you remember the robot?
Yes,
Robert?
Yes,
kind of
robotics.
With kind of clanking sounds coming from the orchestra, and the audience were going mental because that's what he's famous for, and he sung the part very well. He was very charming.
Yes.
Jason Manford as the Cowardly Lion did his best Bert Lahr impression. You have to with that role, I think. What did you stick him up? All that kind of stuff.
But he was partly something from the 50s?
Because he came from the Vegas version of the set. He came on and did If He Only Had the Noive, ending in the style of Elvis, which is and the arrangement was kind of picked up in the style of da, 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 da. So it's clever, but some people might not like it. That's I guess it's one of those Marmite shows.
It seems to me that if you're going to revive and revise a classic, it's got to be different to the original. You can't try and recreate the original, which is partly, I think, what went wrong with the Royal Shakespeare Company's version.
And also big credit to Christina Bianco, the wonderful impressionist, whom I last saw in The Rise and Fall of Little Voice, and we've had her on the show when she spoke about that. She plays Glinda, the Good Witch of... Was it Galinda? I don't know. The Good Witch.
Glinda.
The Good Witch of the East, and she comes on in a kind of 1950s motorbike. So it is kind of, oh, this is so weird, but yet it's what a dream would be like if you were kind of,
It does sound rather witty.
Yeah. And there's nice moments like Galinda's weapon is a mobile phone.
I think in the original she's Glinda. It's only in Wicked that she has
Galinda.
Another
Galinda with a G. And her mobile phone that she kind of powers up by doing a dun 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 dun. It's the first 6 notes of the overture. So there's some quite, fun. If you're a nerd about the Wizard of Oz and kind of musical theatre, there are lots of fun references, which is why some might say it as a bit pantomime, because it does kind of stretch the concept a bit. But if you go in knowing that, it's fine.
Good.
I think.
Well, it sounds like really something that people should see, and certainly wonderful for families at the moment.
Yes. Also, a show wonderful for families, which I'd like to talk to you about briefly, Robert, is Mrs. Doubtfire.
I've booked to see it, but I haven't seen it yet.
Which I saw. Forgive me, it was about a month ago I saw it, so I'm a bit hazy on it. But had a bit of a history, hasn't it? COVID wasn't very kind to it on Broadway. Did it start off somewhere before Broadway? Was it Seattle or one of the usual?
I think it was on Broadway to begin with.
And then it went to Manchester to the Opera House, which is their kind of same path it took for Back to the Future and Ghost and other. That's like our version of Boston, isn't it, Robert? Where the shows go to
Either die or come to life.
Yeah, and thankfully this made it to the Shaftesbury Theatre, which I must say has been refurbished beautifully. The downstairs bar is like nothing I've ever seen in a theatre. It's quite incredible. So bravo to ambassadors, not ambassadors, sorry, it's independently owned, isn't it? Bravo to the Shaftesbury Theatre for that. This is kind of everything you expect an American musical comedy to be based on the film. Apart from that, it has way too many ballads, which just appears to be something that Americans do, isn't it, Robert?
Well, I don't know about that, but I take your word for it, Nick. I'm very interested because I wondered whether you could make such a musical out of that film, or whether it would just appear sentimental and a bit contrived. I mean, the thing that interests me is that on Broadway it was sort of almost back to back with Tootsie, which is also it has a drag performance in it, and it seems to me from what people are now saying is that Mrs. Doubtfire is actually much better than Tootsie. Although I think on Broadway Tootsie got more appreciation. I'm not sure.
Well, look at the one which one of the two is transferred.
Yes, exactly.
And I think, forgive me, Mrs. Doubtfire, for today's theatre-going audience, which are, 25 to 30, 35, they're the kind of people paying for it, grew up with the film.
Yes.
So and when was Tootsie released?
Well, I think it was the early 70s, very early.
Because I hadn't heard of Tootsie until it was a musical.
Yes.
So I think that's why Mrs. Doubtfire, as a brand, will be more successful around the world.
Yes.
The problem is, and this is why the role is a massive shoes to fill, you cannot do it any differently.
Yes. So what about Gabriel Vick? Because actually I knew Gabriel Vick when he was a very young performer, and he went in, I think, to Avenue Q first as an understudy and then took over. So how does he do as Mrs. Doubtfire?
He's absolutely excellent. I will say I loved how the show started. So as normal, I'm not great at voices, but you'll forgive me. It was like, hello, welcome to Mrs. Doubtfire here at the Shaftesbury Theatre. Please, this is so boring. Can I do it like Prince Charles or something? Hello, welcome to Mrs. Doubtfire. Who put these pens here? Should I do it as I don't know? And he went through all these impressions, and then the house lights went down and the curtain went up, and he was sat in the booth doing the voiceover for the beginning of the show, and a woman came on and said, "That's fine, cut. We'll leave it there." So that was a really smart way of introducing us the fact that this is in the theatre.
Your Prince Charles impersonation is actually rather good, Nick.
Thank you. King Charles, I think you'll find.
King Charles, of course. Yes. King Charles III.
Yes, King Charles III. And this is actually smart. They've actually put some thought into this. Yes, there were too many ballads, but it is it's a very emotional piece. And I went with a friend who, like so many people, has had difficulties at home and difficulties with family, and he said it was actually incredibly moving at times, and that's what theatre can deliver more than a film.
Yes.
I think if you're in the audience at that moment and sharing this story, it can be incredibly emotional, can't it?
I seldom cry in real life, but I often cry in the theatre.
Yeah.
And I think that, that says it, doesn't it? And I don't really cry in films.
No. And Laura Tebbett as the mother is wonderful. The kids, they were British kids playing American kids on stage, so that's fine. And they made the teenage girl a bit angsty, and the girl had the most annoyingly cute voice you'll ever hear. Hey, man, all that kind of stuff. But the character of Daniel, extremely well done. The speed, I think at one point he has a 17-second quick change.
My God. And
of course, it doesn't have to look as good because you're, 200 feet away from the person playing him. But looking at the photos in the programme, it's not a pretty sight. You wouldn't want that turning up at your door.
When I was very young and an actor, I had a 25-second change, and that was a complete nightmare. So
Yeah.
I don't know how a 17-second.
And it's interesting looking at the photos in the show now. There's some very, very clever musical staging going on here. 2 moments stand out. Obviously, the song where he's cooking the meal, that's a whole... And that, for reasons we might go into one day, that meant a lot to Robert, and I'm sure it'll mean to me, and it will mean a lot to you, Robert. And it... where the bra goes on fire and all this kind of iconic stuff in the film. But there's one scene where he uses what's called a loop machine, where he records something and you can play it back on loop and he sings over that. And the whole song was done as a diegetic moment, as in we are witnessing, because he's a kid's entertainer and he finds this machine in his TV studio and he starts playing with it and improvises this song. And so it became and that knocked the house down, that song, because it was... And I thought, I've never seen anything like this in a musical before. And that's really clever. Now, it's the same writing team behind... what was that dreadful show with the Americans banging on about Shakespeare and everything's a musical? Do you remember that? Something Rotten.
Yes.
Yes.
Something Rotten. Yes.
Did you ever see or hear of that?
Yes, I did, and I hated it.
Okay.
Gabriel Ball, Christian Ball was the star of it. I didn't like it at all.
So it's booked by John O'Farrell and music, lyrics, an additional book by Wayne Kirkpatrick.
Who's the director?
The director is Jerry Zaks.
Well, he's a well-known director of farce and musicals.
Yeah, and there's a lot of farce in this, obviously.
Who did the choreography?
The choreography is Lauren Lataro.
Oh, haven't heard of her.
And it's just very classily done. It's Americans doing what they do best, which is putting a schmaltzy, family-based thing on stage. And there's quite a clever nightmare sequence when an entire chorus line of Mrs. Doubtfire's come on. All drag performers, which I thought was rather wonderful. So there's lots of weird kind of moments in there. The bit I was a bit annoyed about was the film, and we'll mention Groundhog Day briefly. The film has a very touching ending with a monologue, which is just Mrs. Doubtfire saying, some people have 2 mummies and 2 daddies, and some people have no mummies and they live with their aunt and all that, and the film just ends. Why can't the Americans just end a show like that?
Yes.
Why do they then have to have a great big number about we're all friends now and we all love each other?
Because they're nervous that a whimsical or quiet ending is not going to send the audience out dancing in the streets. And that you're right. It does say something about the culture. Can we... well, this sounds like a must-see, Nick. Do you want to switch over and talk a little bit about Groundhog Day? Because I've seen that twice now. I saw it first when it was at the Old Vic originally, and it was a terrible mistake that the producers made not to let it transfer to London, because it would have sold out for years, and then it would have been a success on Broadway. But it was a flop on Broadway because they...
I don't think for Broadway it had a very unfortunate set of circumstances, I think, and it was just cursed from the beginning. I think we are going to do a full episode with it with my friend Dom, who's a massive fan of it as well, and we'll talk about the show in great detail with him. And
well, shall we just say it's brilliant?
It's brilliant. You should go and see it. And if when you have seen it, go and see it again, because you'll pick up on things. So you've seen it twice. You've seen it recently.
Yes.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on this? Because it is a smaller production, isn't it? It is made to tour.
I could hardly distinguish between the two. I thought this was just as good as the initial production.
Better?
No, my memory of both. My memory of the original one was that it was stunning, and my memory of this one, it's beautifully staged. It's got a wonderful performance by Andy Carl. Everyone in the show is good, and it's beautifully directed by Matthew Watchers.
You have to feel some form of something for Andy Carl, who did the role originally here, then went to Broadway. Now he's back doing a role about someone who lives the same day every day, doing the same thing every night. It's a massive undertaking, isn't it?
Absolutely. To have played the same role in, as it were, 3 different versions of the production.
And maybe workshops as well. I don't know the history of it. But There's one moment in this show because I heard all sorts of things like the suicide song has gone and the suicide scene has changed, but they've added an illusion in this show which blew everyone's mind when I saw it. Do you remember the bit I'm talking about? No. Do you remember the ladder scene?
Oh, yes.
Which, if you see Matilda, it's very similar, but
yes.
There's another... It's a wonderful use of misdirection, and that's a new addition for this production, I think. But it's just a delight to have it back on, and a lesson learnt, I think, from them to not get silly and rush things to Broadway. Because I dare say it's too good for Broadway.
I think, yes. I think the producers were the producers of the original film, and they insisted on taking it to Broadway. So they got their fingers burnt.
Mm. Well, what is it about that show that works for you, Robert?
Well, I think
what's going on in that?
I think it's everything. I think the lyrics are mostly brilliant. I think the songs are the music is okay. It's not. He's not a great composer, but a musical theatre composer.
I think I have to give. Tim mentioned the songs and the music and lyrics, as he did for Matilda, but I want to give special credit to Christopher Nightingale, who is the real musical mind behind both Matilda and Groundhog Day and so many of other Matthew Walsh's productions. Go and see A Christmas Carol at the Old Vic. It's one of the greatest theatrical things I've ever seen in my life. And I have to give special credit to him because he orchestrated it all, but he also takes these moments and makes them into what we hear with...
Yes.
You know, the opening number is half an hour long.
Yes. I think the thing that struck me most about it is one has seen the film, most people have seen the film, quite a lot of people have seen the film, but what's amazing is the way in which they make it work on stage. The sets are really clever. They don't try to build things up into big numbers for the sake of it. When there is a big number, it's justified. And I think that, again, book, music and lyrics work perfectly together, and it's very well directed, and that's the best I can say.
It's also amazing that, yes, the book is written by, is it Danny Rubin?
Yes, who wrote the film, I think.
Who'd never done a musical.
Yes.
And that's astonishing.
Yes.
That's his first book, but how much did Matthew Walsh's have in shaping it?
Yes.
Speaking of Matthew Walsh, he's not involved, but are you excited / do you want to see The Lord of the Rings?
Yes, if it's not quite as long as it was before. I am interested. I thought it was stunningly staged.
And this is an outside... immersive, they call it semi-immersive, whatever that means.
That sounds like the right way to do it.
Yeah. An outside production that you walk around following to different locations or something. I don't know. That
does sound like the way to do it.
I mean, it sounds utterly bizarre, but I wish Matthew Walsh were reviving that production, but I don't think we'll ever see that again.
No,
I think that's
it was a stunning production.
Yeah. 3 shows. You going to see them all, Robert, again?
I will see Groundhog Day if it runs another 6 months.
Yeah.
I couldn't see it.
I think it'll move or go on tour. I think. Yeah.
I would like to see Wizard of Oz from what you've told me, and I will certainly be seeing Mrs. Doubtfire.
Lovely. Let us know what you think. Thank you so much, Robert, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Musical Talk. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk, you can visit our website at musicaltalk.co.uk, where you'll find all our episodes, or you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Musical Talk.